I'd like to draw your attention to Psalm 107. For me, one of the most beautiful psalms in the Bible, part of the 5th book of the Psalms, the last part of the psalm bundle. And I would like to talk to you about the perfect storm and the perfect God. Well, they called her Sandy. Now, Sandy is not the sweet and kind-hearted little girl next door, or the beautiful, pretty brunette sitting in the front row of the philosophy class. No, this Sandy is an angry woman. She's a raging one. She's quite a witch. And this Sandy, she stormed her way across the country in the week past and left so many people in disarray. She disrupted, and even many people died. Of course, we're talking about the hurricane, the disaster this week in America. Well, it wasn't on the news yet, or the blame game started. They blamed about everyone from the president to be re-elected to anyone else. But it was just a very big storm. And when a storm that size hits, no amount of human intervention could have prevented what happened. It was a huge storm. And I believe every one of us sat in front of the television watching what happened. What is a story? What is the message for you and me? Well, storms happen. Storms are part of life. Whoever is to blame or whatever is to blame, it doesn't really matter. Storms are part of our lives. If I look into the Bible, if I look throughout the history of the Bible, I see storms everywhere. Big storms, small. I see storms in people right from the beginning, from Genesis, going right through to Revelation. Storms are part of the Bible. And if I look at Psalm 107, I see here also a storm, a raging storm. Psalm 107 is, as I said, one of the most beautiful psalms for me in the Bible. It has a beautiful structure. And I would just like us to look at that structure this afternoon when we consider what we have read in Psalm 107, that part that Reverend Kim read to us. The structure is very basic. It talks about 4 kinds of hurting people. It talks about their reaction to their hurt. It talks about the God who hears, God's reaction to them. And then it ends with the people worshiping God. It's a psalm of thanksgiving. It starts with the words, "Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good." Let's look at the structure of the psalm. In the first place, it tells of people who hurt. Hurting people. And this psalm tells of 4 kinds of hurting people. And I think you and I will agree that we live in a world full of hurting people. People going through storms. Even people experiencing perfect storms in their lives. Perfect storms that is more than what they can bear, more than they can handle. In this psalm, it tells of 4 kinds of people hurting. The first kind, it reminds us, the first category of people here, we see in verse 4, some wandered in desert wastes, finding no way to an inhabited town. It can be translated as well as people looking for a place to sit. One of the words that is translated thirsty is also called frantic. It talks about people wandering, people not have something to hold on, restless. People wandering from the one thing to the other, trying to find something, someone to hold fast onto. They're frantic, they're restless. Then they try this and then they try that. Always seemingly not finding. Restless, wandering all over, trying to find that one thing that they can hold on to, maybe in their careers and wherever they can go. They go from one place to another, trying to find peace and find rest. And somehow they cannot find it. You know people like that. I know people like that. Trying to find rest. The second category in verse 10 are those who are dwelling in darkness, in the shadow of death, prisoners in misery and chains. The Bible gives us here a reason they rebelled against God. But read this psalm once again. In every place, even where they have rebelled against God, there is this note of grace. It's like a symphony. It's like music. You hear the drums, but you also hear the strings. And this part tells of those who are in chains, those who are slaves, those who are bound to whatever. Maybe a slave of bitterness and anger, slave of their past, a slave of their future, a slave of themselves. Many people are slaves of themselves. I sometimes tell people when I'm counseling, well, you are your own greatest enemy. Got this fight within themselves. People in bondage. Maybe you are. The third category of people is described beginning in verse 17. The Bible calls them fools. They are involved in sinfulness. It says their iniquity has caused them to be afflicted. And once again we hear the strings. Not only the timpani. The strings, the grace that comes in that says, well, they're the hopeless, the people ready to quit, people ready to give up. Maybe you know people like that. They're ready to give up and die. The hopeless with hopelessness. I sometimes counsel people like that. Maybe not even people that come for help, but maybe you have been there sometime, someplace in your life that you're just ready to quit. Maybe you're there now. You don't see hope. Ready to quit, ready to give up, ready to try something else. Ready for that change, but it's not a change that makes you go wild with excitement. No. Listen to this beautiful, beautiful part of Psalm 107, where there's a change in mood. It's from the minor key to a major key, from despair to hope. God sees those people. God sees you. God is so conscious about you. He knows you want to give up. He knows when we are at our wits' end and we are ready just to quit, just to give up and go. But it's a fourth kind of people that really amazes me. It's those people we find in verses 23 to 32 that we've read. Those people who are just doing their business. They're obviously on sea, they had boats and they had ships, and they were doing their daily business. Now, it does not indicate these people have done anything wrong. They simply engage in the normal acts of life. But in the middle of those acts, suddenly, without warning, a storm comes up. Well, who sends the storm? Verse 25 says, God spoke and rose up a stormy wind which lifted up the waves of the sea. Tragedy hits. A trial comes upon them that they cannot handle. It's like Sandy coming along, Sandy coming to visit. And from this orientation, from this point of everything goes well, everything is fine, suddenly they had to deal with a storm way beyond measure. What they trusted in, what they thought was set up for them, what they thought was a sure thing no longer is. They're at their wits' end. Maybe it describes you. Maybe everything went fine. Everything's okay. And suddenly, one morning you get up and everything goes wrong. Life-changing storms. It happens. Storms happen. So these are the four categories of people hurting. The frantic and the restless, looking for some security. Those who are chained and bound in slavery. Those who are discouraged and feel hopeless, ready to quit. And those who think everything is going well, and then suddenly they hit with a tragedy, a storm of some unexpected occurrence that drives them to their knees. So in the second place, what did they do? Well, every part of this beautiful psalm, where it describes those hurting people, has a beautiful positive side to it. All of those people had one thing in common. They cried out to the Lord. In this psalm, all four categories respond to their crisis in the same way. People who hurt become the people who cry out. They cry out to the Lord in their trouble. Charles Spurgeon, writes this in his commentary on the Psalms. He says, some men will never pray till they are half-starved, and for their best interest it's far better for them to be empty and faint than to be full and stout-hearted. If hunger brings us to our knees, it is more useful to us than feasting. If thirst drives us to the fountain, it is better than the deepest draughts of worldly joy. And if fainting leads to crying, it is better than the strength of the mighty. Sometimes we need a tragedy. We need to know slavery. We need to come to our wits' end for us to cry out to God. The perfect storm causes us to cry out to a perfect God. Without the storm, we will stay in the minor key. We will sing our songs there and don't even realize our state. The storm shows us where we are, but the storm has another side to it. The storm shows us God is perfect. God is the one who is in control. The storm shows us a different story. The exciting part. And this is the third part of the psalm. In the third place, they cried out to God, and then it exposes to us, as it reveals to us, a God who hears. The God who hears. Each of these testimonies begins with the description of the people telling their stories, crying out to God. And then the focus turns to God in each case. And the theme becomes not only the hurting or the crying, but what emerges from all of this, from this huge storm, is a God who hears. It's about God, not about them. The focus shifts from them to God. There are three things that I want to mention here about the God who hears. The first, it reveals to them that this God who hears, this God who listens to them, is a God who gives us his undivided attention. He is the God who gives us his undivided attention. Sometimes we think maybe I shouldn't bother God with my little storm. Maybe he has bigger storms to attend to than mine. It's like a mother with 10 kids. She doesn't always know which one to attend to. The one is maybe older than the other, or the other one needs more attention. We as humans are limited in this way. We can't wipe bottoms and read books and answer phones all the time, but what about God? He's not a harried parent. He's always there to listen to my call. There's not a call that he will not answer. There's never a burden he cannot handle. God can handle every burden I bear. God can even handle my rage. If you read the Psalms, you get all these psalms of rage to God, and they're angry and they shout out to God. God can handle my tantrum. Don't think yours are too fierce for him to handle. He is the God of undivided attention. He's also the God of unqualified acceptance. Isn't that wonderful? Unqualified acceptance. The first and fourth categories of people, those are the people that we don't read about sin or iniquities or some kind of bad things they did. No. The second and third categories, there are some foolishness. But every time, he welcomes them with open arms. It's like the father of the prodigal child. He doesn't ask questions. He says, come. Come to me. And finally, the God who hears is a God of unequaled power. That's a wow thing. Verse 20. To those who were discouraged, the psalmist says, he sent his word and healed them and delivered them from their destruction. He sent his word. They were set free. The God who hears is a God of undivided attention, unqualified acceptance, unequaled power. He has the power to shatter the gates of bronze, to burst the bars of iron, to free us from whatever enslaves us, to lift us up from our discouragement, to rescue us from the storms. A God of unequaled power, the God of surprises. During the storm, it is as if God is asking you, cry out, come to me. I will show you the greatest surprise of your life. The God that I serve, the God of Psalm 107, is the God of surprises. What was the reaction to his deliverance, to the hearing God? How did the people respond to that in the fourth place? We discussed the people who heard, the people who cry out, the God who hears. But in each of these testimonies, we come then to God's people who worship. How did the people react to God's surprises, to God's hearing of their iniquities and of their dilemmas, their storms? The first, they were thanking him. God, we thank you. It starts with a thanksgiving. The second kind of worship that we see in verses 22 and 32 is a testimony. We will sing of God's glory and God's praises. But the third kind of worship, it's a worship that is not frequently acknowledged as a worship, but I would like to suggest that the crying out itself is an act of worship. Crying out. By crying out to God, we are acknowledging our own inability to do that, get out of a storm ourselves. We are saying, God, you are the one who has the power and ability and the love to lift me out of this situation. You are the one who can do this. We are acting out what we have learned throughout the scriptures. Without me, you can do nothing, says Jesus. Without me, you can do nothing. Sometimes we should be reminded of that. Sometimes we should just acknowledge that. True worship is humbling ourselves before God, admitting that we are powerless, and then come out. Say, God, all I can do is cry out, and you do the rest. In conclusion, we have looked at the people who hurt, people who cry out. We have talked about this God who hears, and our proper response to him, to worship him. God's promise here, brothers and sisters, is that he will never leave you, not forsake you. He will answer you. His covenant with you, I will give you my undivided attention, my unqualified acceptance. I will answer you with unequaled power. So, the perfect God is perfecting you in and through the perfect storm.